Now, you may recall me asking on this show, where is President Biden's vaccine mandate for private employers? Well, back in August, the president announced that the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, would issue an emergency temporary standard requiring private businesses with 100 or more employees to vaccinate all of their employees, test them for COVID weekly, or fire them. The announcement caused an uproar as dozens of state attorneys general promised to challenge the rule. But week after week after week went by with no rule. Well, yesterday, OSHA submitted the initial text of the rule to the Office of Management and Budget. Here to discuss this and more is U.S. Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, who is a member of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, as well as the Foreign Relations Committee, the Budget Committee, and the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. Senator, welcome back to the program.
Hello, Terry. I hope you're well.
I'm doing quite well, thank you. Let's talk about this emergency rule. What does it mean? This is an emergency temporary standard, and how long is this process going to take?
Well, they're obviously trying to bypass the Administrative Procedures Act, which takes quite some time to enact significant rules, which I consider this one to be. I don't see the emergency here in terms of OSHA's issuance of this thing. Let's first state what I think is the obvious, is that there's no rationale for these mandates. Now that we know that even if you're vaccinated, you can get infected, you can transmit the disease. Unfortunately, you can also be hospitalized and die even if you're fully vaccinated. But, folks just on the get infected and transmit. So what's the rationale for this incredibly divisive and corrosive and freedom-robbing mandate? It makes no sense whatsoever. So I'm doing everything I can to stop it, just pointing out the absurdity of it, but also pointing out the devastating impact it's going to have on military readiness, our healthcare system, our transportation system. We're just seeing the tip of the iceberg in upstate New York on healthcare, in terms of Southwest flight cancellations, in terms of, even on the docks, trying to load imported products into our economy. This is going to be devastating to so many sections of our economy. And again, we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg.
Senator, it appears that there are many who, they may not be opposed to the vaccine, but they're certainly opposed to the mandate, and they're not going to get the vaccine. And if it requires them leaving their job, then they will. As you pointed out, in New York last week, I think it was 1,400 healthcare workers were fired because they didn't get the vaccine. We've seen the cancellation and delays of flights, and it's rumored that was a result of a effort by the pilots to draw attention to this mandate of the vaccine for them. We're already having a supply chain shortage. What do you think this is going to happen if we lose all of these workers out of the workforce?
Well, it's going to be devastating to our economy. But let me focus a little bit on nurses and doctors who I've been in contact with now for months. These are the heroes of the pandemic. They exposed themselves.
They were heroes last year. They were heroes last year, but now they're villains.
To some, not to me. They're still heroes.
To this administration.
Right, precisely. But anyway, they were exposed. Some died. Most survived. Now they're treating vaccine injuries as well. So I can tell you that the doctors and nurses who are adamantly opposed to the mandate will not get vaccinated. They will either quit, and we'll lose decades of experience, particularly as baby boomers start retiring. But even young nurses, they see the impact. They are not going to get vaccinated. They are going to be terminated, and we will not be able to replace them. As good as military medics are, they cannot replace decades worth of experience in terms of doctors and nurses and other healthcare workers. So this could be incredibly devastating for our healthcare system. But across the board, I'm talking to large trucking companies who believe they'll lose all of their truckers to the smaller companies who, again, they'll be able to move goods, but not with the efficiency of the current system. It'll disrupt everything. Just like whenever government gets involved in the private sector, it screws it up, and it screws it up badly. So we can expect some really severe economic dislocations here.
Let me go back to those healthcare workers for a while, because I know what you just said for a fact to be true, because my daughter is an ER nurse and she worked with the COVID patients. She contracted COVID when it first came out. She has natural immunity, but if forced to get the vaccine, she's not going to do it. And there's a shortage of nurses already in our country. Do you have any idea what is contained in the OSHA rule, and will they make allowance for natural immunity?
Well, they haven't yet, and there's no indication that the federal health agencies will even begin to acknowledge the effectiveness of natural immunity, even though the science, again, I just hate the way we're always preached about the science. The science tells us that natural immunity is better, more robust than the vaccine immunity, which, quite honestly, the effectiveness is dropping on a daily basis, basically. And by the way, it makes sense. The natural immunity recognizes the entire virus, so it's going to be more effective to the variations and adaptations as it evolves. You know, the vaccine immunity is focused on the spike protein. If that changes, you're going to be out of luck. And we're already seeing that's happening, particularly the Pfizer vaccine. But again, Tony, part of the problem is we're not getting the information we need out of our health agencies. We have to go to England and their Public Health England. We've got to go to Israel to really get the data to see what's happening recently. The data that you're hearing Fauci spout is literally months old. And it supports their contention, but it doesn't support these mandates.
What we do have access to are the daily rates of infection of COVID, and there seems to be a correlation. I don't know that it's a connection, but clearly the states and the areas of the country that have higher vaccinations, we're seeing pre-pandemic rates of infection.
Yeah, you think if the vaccine were so effective, and I put this chart on the Senate floor, you'd see the pandemic wind down, but instead it ramped back up with the Delta variant. You know, the other thing we really need to be talking about as well is in terms of vaccine injuries. I mean, there's a plausible case to be made that you're probably more likely to have a vaccine injury if you were previously infected. And by the way, the latest numbers on VAERS is over 16,000 deaths, over 5,300 occurring on days 0, 1, or 2, 778,000 total adverse events. And the two complaints about VAERS is, A, it doesn't prove causation, I understand that. But again, when you've got over 5,300 deaths on day 0, 1, or 2, I'd be concerned. And the other complaint is it dramatically understates the number of adverse events, which means the 778,000 is probably dramatically understated in terms of true number, which, by the way, is probably one of the reasons so many people just get one dose, because they had a pretty bad experience with the first, right, and they're not going to get the second. And again, healthcare workers, when you know the science, when you understand you're immune, when you understand that you may be at even greater risk for vaccine injuries with getting vaccinated, you're not going to do it.
So, Senator, let me ask you this question regarding the this push to get the vaccine, despite the evidence that is out there. When you talk about injuries, who's going to be liable if they're mandated to get this vaccine and they have the negative consequences that some have experienced? Who's going to be liable? The employer, the federal government, who?
Right now, nobody. And that's a real problem. I would certainly support legislation actually writing a bill that would allow a cause of action in state court against any employer that forces this on their employee. Now, again, if the federal government actually enacts an OSHA rule, that's going to shield those companies because they're just doing what the government is telling them to do. And I think to a certain extent, that's what Joe Biden and his administration, they're playing this game. They're talking about this rule. Okay, now they've written it, but it's still going to take some time to issue it. All these mandate deadlines are occurring within the next month or two. It'll be too late at that point in time.
Right.
So again, this is going to be so devastating. And I need to warn your audience again, we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg in terms of the impact this is going to have across our economy.
Senator, final question for you. Any chance that Republicans can stop this rule from going into effect?
Only by exposing it, by speaking publicly like I am here today, by encouraging others that are going to be affected by this to speak out. And by the way, more and more nurses, more and more doctors, some of them vaccine injured themselves, are speaking out and very bravely, because they're risking their medical license. They're obviously risking their employment, cancel culture. So the more and more people are having the courage to speak out, and that's about the only way this is going to be stopped is pretty much mass resistance.
Resist. That's the only thing we have at this point to stop the mandate. Senator, I want to thank you for joining us. Always great to have you on the program.